Hello, and welcome to the humanity where normally we do the things with the stuff for the people. But tonight, things are a little different. As you may notice, Matt is not here. He's out on vacation, so you're stuck with just me. I'm Tommy, and tonight I'm doing some things with my own stuff, mostly for me, but we'll see if it's for the people as well. And no, that does not mean this just turned into an OnlyFans thing. If you don't know what that means, don't look it up. Don't worry about it. So like I said, just me tonight. I'm doing things a little differently. I figured with Matt not here, just take the opportunity to do a little more about just basically sharing my own story, going maybe a little more in depth than I have on here in the past. Even some things I haven't even necessarily discussed like in person with anyone. So yeah, sharing some new stuff. I've been really looking forward to this. Just like I said, just a chance to let y'all have a little more idea, like where I'm coming from, why I'm where I'm at, where I've been. Looking forward to it. Honestly, a little nervous tonight. That may come out. You may notice that, but not really nervous about sharing stuff because honestly, like pretty much everything about my life, I'm totally fine sharing. It's really more, I'm just more nervous about forgetting things. I can blame the ADHD or just general forgetfulness on my part with that. So as you may have seen from posts I made earlier today, I did actually type up some notes, most of them last night, a little of them throughout the day today as well. So we'll see how well I stick to those and actually remember to say all the things I'm really wanting to say. Because again, this for me is like, I really just want people to have a good understanding of, like I said, where I'm coming from, why I believe or don't believe the things I do or don't. Because I feel, especially with people who, identify as atheists, there's a lot of misunderstandings. People have certain ideas of like why people leave the faith, things like that. So yeah, it's more just like I said, so y'all can get to know me a little better and know why I think the way I do. So first off, I just want to say, as I'm sharing things, because I have like at the top of my notes here, that this is to me more descriptive than prescriptive, if that makes sense. So when I describe about what I'm thinking and where I'm at, it's not so much me telling you need to be thinking this way and you need to be where I'm at, but more I'm just describing why I'm where I'm at and why I think the way I do. But before we get into all that, as we usually do, like to share just like what I'm having to drink tonight. Instead of the usual beer, I figure a special occasion I'd, pull out some scotch. So this, say a special occasion, not necessarily that special of a scotch, but it's Tomatin, at least I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced. Highland single malt Scotch whiskey, bourbon and sherry casks, 12-year. As much as I love Scotch, I don't really know much about it, so I have no idea if that's actually like a good one. All I know is it's one I've had before, and I enjoy it, and it was like under $50 for the bottle, and doesn't taste like piss. So there it is. So yeah. So, and as I'm sharing my story tonight, we see we have some people jumping on now. So please feel free at any point, as usual, leave some comments. Like I said, part of why I was wanting to do this tonight was because I really would enjoy some interaction. Like if people had any questions. So yeah, I see Jimmy showing how it's done. Yeah. Good evening, Jimmy. How you doing, buddy? Good to see you here. So yeah, like I said, if at any point people have questions about things I said, or like I said, I have some notes I'm going to try to follow to make sure I kind of hit all the things I want to talk about. But obviously, if there's anything we say, hey, go more in depth about that. If you want to like kind of redirect me on some things, or if I get myself off track and then say, hey, you were talking about this. That sounded interesting. Stop talking about whatever shit you distracted yourself with. And yeah, obviously feel free to pull me back in as need be. And obviously same goes for anyone who's watching this not live. Always enjoy going back and seeing comments from people who watch on the replay. So, and I will be sure to interact. So, watching Scandal. I haven't seen it, but I've heard good things. So, all right. Well, we'll see if I can keep your attention or not. Challenge accepted. All right. So, yeah. So, like I said, descriptive, not prescriptive. Take everything I say as I'm just describing where I'm at, just to let you all know where and why I'm at. So, I guess first of all, like, why do I feel like sharing my story? Like, what do I think is so shareable, I guess, about it? And honestly, a lot of it is just from the people I've gotten to know who have like told me what they find like kind of interesting or intriguing about my story, I guess. And people seem interested in hearing it. I think I've been interviewed several times, including by Jimmy, who's there in the chat right now. He's one of the first people who interviewed me. Derek Day, people familiar with him, another guy we've had on the show, and a couple other people, Aaron Tomlinson, Bishop Jamel Broadnax. Also, guys, if you're watching this, plan on having you on at some point too. We'll get back with you. But I guess the part of my story that people seem to find the most intriguing is how I went from being a lifelong Christian to having and then recovering from stage 4 cancer, and basically having that being the catalyst to me losing my faith. Yeah, I guess it's something, the more I think about it, maybe the more odd to me that seems, because usually in that kind of situation, especially like with how I recovered, and I'll get into that whole story and timeline as we go on this evening. But yeah, it happened seemingly like very suddenly, and obviously myself, like when I was a Christian, and most of the Christians in my life definitely, like I would have seen it this way, and like the Christians in my life definitely did see it as very miraculous, just with how it was kind of quickly and how bad things were looking, and things just like suddenly just I was in remission. So for most Christians I know, and if this had happened to me maybe even just a couple years earlier, my story would have been, this strengthened my faith. This made me an even more devout Christian, made me more faithful. Like it really, strengthened my belief and felt closer to God and all that. But for me, for whatever reason, it just had kind of the opposite effect. Because I think when most people hear, well, I had cancer and then I became an atheist, I think a lot of people can maybe kind of get that backwards, at least as far as like why it happened. I kind of relate it to how also the reason I'm bald, like before having cancer, I had hair, and like I still can, I just keep it shaved just out of preference. But the reason I'm bald, much like turning atheist, is like related to having cancer, but not in the same way that most people like. Because most people, like if they had cancer and they go bald, it's because of chemotherapy and they lose their hair. Now for me, like I did have chemotherapy, but it was only like 2 rounds and I actually didn't lose any hair from it. But the cancer, just because people know my story, and again, I'll get into this, the primary tumor was just on my head. So with it being removed, and it's actually healed over quite nicely, but it used to be like a much bigger scar. I'm just like, and like this part of my head's like just never going to regrow hair. So I'm like, might as well just save the whole thing. Also at the time made it easier to keep Band-Aids on. So, and like I said, I kind of like it. So certainly easier than just like having to get haircuts every now and then. So, all right. So my story. It's like all good stories. It starts at the beginning, at least the beginning of me. So, born into a pretty typical, like American fundamentalist, evangelical, Baptist home. Yeah, just grew up in the church in a Christian home my whole life. And the way I like to put it is just conservative in every sense of the word, both theologically, religiously, and politically, socially. Yeah, just very Republican, very people are familiar with the Reformed fundamentalist Christian tradition and the Protestant wing of Christianity. A phrase I like to use to kind of describe the feeling, I guess, more to contrast us with maybe the more like charismatic, more like spiritual, like versions of the faith. You'd hear phrases thrown around like, well, if you want to hear from God, read your Bible. If you want to hear him speak to you audibly, read it out loud. Very, if people are familiar with the phrase sola scriptura. So like, the Bible is the inerrant, infallible word of God. Like it just cannot be wrong. So if you disagree with it, or if you disagree with anything it says, you're wrong. And of course, like the whole thing, all 66 books that we had in our Protestant Bible is the word of God. It's like, this is it. This is final, unchangeable, can't depart from it. But I was told also, kind of in contrast to that, but at the time it didn't seem ironic, but it was like that other phrase I'm sure a lot of people have heard about Christianity is like, well, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. I mean, doesn't that sound so nice? And I'll get in this more later, but that actually ended up being one of the more damaging ideas for me, was viewing it that way. And I'll just like go into it like briefly here, because basically what that meant for me is like, okay, so it's not a religion, so I'm not supposed to view it as being like super strict and legalistic, but there's still definitely a lot of rules to it, not just like what you're supposed to believe, like about the Bible, about Jesus, about the world, about yourself, about family structure, societal structure. Like it's all very like strict and regimented. But still it's a relationship. So when it comes to how you actually relate to God, even though, like I said, it was not at all like some of the more like charismatic denominations where people would say, "Oh, I actually like heard from God," or like I heard, like people say, "Like I got a word," whether it's for themselves or to share with someone else. Because I remember like growing up, like I didn't know why. I just knew like the people who like the Christians who were like that, like I just knew they were wrong, but only because they weren't like us. Like because I remember asking my mom once. But speaking of which, I also want to make this clear is as I go through my story and I talk about different ideas that I maybe found harmful or maybe did some damage or that I think are just like dangerous or whatever. I'm aiming that criticism at the ideas, not the people who taught these ideas to me. And that especially goes for my parents. Like even now, like that I'm, spoiler alert for those who haven't been keeping up with the show or me, no longer Christian. But even now, like both my parents and I appreciate the hell out of this for them because I know for so many former Christians, this is not their story and this is not the case, but they didn't like shun me or disown me. Like we're still close. They're still awesome, loving parents. Make sure they wish I would come back. And, they definitely let me know gently, sometimes. And I appreciate that because I know it's just out of love and concern for me. That's what they think is best for me is to come back. But, but it's not like it's something that gets in the way of our relationship, which, like I said, I appreciate. And that goes for like most of my like friends and family since like coming out of faith. So yeah, really appreciate that. But anyway, going back to thinking about like other types of churches and how they're different. I remember asking my mom as a kid, like, well, why do these other churches do things differently? Like what, like is our church, like, what do we believe? And I mean, the way my mom put it, like I was probably like, 5 at the time. So I don't know how much of this was really her really expressing her full views, or more she just thought this was maybe the simplest way to explain to her inquisitive little 5-year-old. But she basically just said, well, we just read the Bible and we believe what it says. And I'm like, huh, why don't the rest of them do that? I mean, I only said that internally. I don't think I said that out loud, but yeah. So that was like my mindset growing up was we're right. And so therefore anyone who thinks differently or disagrees with us about anything is just automatically wrong, just because, which, this will be a common theme. So yeah, so growing up in that environment, and again, still trying to view this as more of a relationship, but I was having a hard time with that. I mean, because of reasons I didn't really understand at the time, but now as an adult and having still not been officially diagnosed with anything, but knowing I have at least some certain neurodivergences that kind of made that whole prospect a little more difficult. And just the general way that we were told Christians are supposed to be and act and relate to God, like whether it was like my introversion, social anxiety, possible autism, not quite sure, but just the whole idea of trying to have a relationship with a being that I can't see, I can't hear from, or get any kind of like real time feedback from, other than maybe just some kind of vague feelings. But then being told that this relationship is supposed to be completely fulfilling. It's supposed to provide me with just ultimate and true like joy and peace and fulfillment, happiness. Maybe that whole like joy versus happiness discussion was like always a thing. Like which, like you can always have joy, but doesn't mean you're always going to be happy, kind of thing. And but then so I was just like, okay, so I'm trying to relate to this being, which I'm told loves me, so I believe that he loves me, but I can't see him, can't really, like, I can talk, apparently I can talk to him, but like having an actual conversation doesn't really seem to work. So, I mean, that's just bad enough, just like with like the social anxiety of like the pressure of any kind of like social like interaction or relationship, especially one of this importance. Hey, Kif. Glad to see you. Tiffany Kane. Folks remember her. I guess we had on here a few weeks ago, a month ago, something like that. Anyway, so trying to have this relationship with this invisible, by all accounts, imperceptible being, but I still absolutely believed was there. And there's just with whatever like social issues and like mental differences that I was dealing with, like I said, made it hard enough. But then you add on the stakes of heaven or hell. So that caused a lot of anxiety and just the feelings of uncertainty. And because I was told, like, in order to know that I'm saved, it's like, okay, you have to accept Jesus into your heart and make him your personal savior. I'm like, I don't really know what that means. So I couldn't tell you how many times I prayed the prayer of salvation, like just hoping that at some point something clicked or I said the exact right phrase so that whatever God needed for me to do or say or believe happened. And okay, now I'm going to go to heaven. So, but because I was in the camp of, the church I went to was like Baptist, very like Calvinist. So it's like once saved, always saved. So it's like, okay, I just got to get in and then I'm good. Obviously there's like, the work of, sanctification and all that, like, perseverance of the saints, going after that. But I was just so concerned about, like, I just don't want to go to hell because, it's hell. Now, fortunately, that's not something that I've heard, like, this happens with a lot of people. It's not something I necessarily had like a lot of nightmares about or really any of that. It was more just like day to day, like, I think I'm saved, but I'm not really sure. And then I would hear like preachers and like youth group leaders say things like I actually heard this phrase, like, if you're not 100% sure that you're saved, then you are 100% lost. And so like that kind of fucked me up for a little bit after hearing that. So I was like, oh shit. I mean, I didn't say oh shit because that would have sent me straight to hell. I was like, oh shoot, I'd better make sure. So like I said, I don't know how many times I just kind of reprayed the prayer. But then what kind of gave me a little bit of assurance was hearing, I think it was in high school, one of my teachers, I went to a Christian school. So it's actually Rob Fogg, like I'm still like in contact with. So I don't know if he's watching this, but Rob, shout out to you. I remember you saying one day in class, talking about your testimony and your story about how you just, at one point in your life, just kind of cried out to God. Is like, look, whatever it means, whatever it takes, like to say I accept you, like whatever it is, I'm saying that right now. So it's like, oh, so I can just say that. Okay, cool. Just whatever I got to say, I'm saying it. So like just that with the understanding, okay, God knows what I mean. So yeah. So like I said, I don't really remember if there was like a certain time where like eventually I finally felt, okay, now I'm good. But yeah, it probably happened at some point. And like by the time I got to middle school, I think by then I was feeling pretty confident. But yeah, so so I guess confidence in the, okay, I'm saved part, but still not confidence in the, I'm actually being a good Christian part. Because again, it's about the relationship, but it's like, I still not getting that feedback that you would normally expect from like an actual relationship. No, it was seeming like other people apparently have it. So not only was there like the jealousy of that, but also just feeling like the guilt of, okay, what am I doing wrong? Because what I believed was, okay, God loves me. He wants a relationship with me. So clearly, like him being God and perfect, like he's doing his part. He's given me the Bible. He's given me, my parents who are bringing me up in the faith. He's given me my Sunday school teachers and pastors and youth group leaders and all these other spiritual leaders in my life, giving me all the information, like, and everything I need to know, and telling me this is enough. This is supposed to be enough. But if I was honest with myself, it wasn't. Like I couldn't just spend hours in prayer and feel like fulfilled with that. I couldn't just keep reading, maybe sometimes like for a little bit, but again, maybe this is probably like the ADHD. No, yeah. Thanks, Jimmy. I feel it, buddy. But yeah, like I couldn't spend as much time like in depth in the word as like, I would see a lot of other people talk about and say like, oh, my time in the word, I was reading the Bible for 2 hours and God was just speaking to me so much through it. I just felt so amazing. I was like, I just never felt that. So just the guilt and shame from that, because I felt like, well, if God isn't enough, then that means there's something wrong with me. Yeah, so I mean, and looking back, maybe that's what made me more attracted to the more like intellectual, more like cerebral, like aspects of the faith. So I got like super into like apologetics. So like I felt like I was at the point like I could like argue or debate like any kind of theological point or like how real God is or how I know I'm saved or how I know that all you non-Christians are just wrong and obviously going straight to hell. So that kind of became like my comfort zone. But it still like wasn't enough. I was wanting it to actually feel like a relationship. But I kept being told, oh, it is fulfilling, but it's all through like prayer and scripture reading and attending church services and singing and going to VBS and volunteering and playing in the worship band or whatever. And I was like, but I'm told God is my father and he loves me. And like I said before, like I have a very loving father so I know what it's like to actually have a father who loves me and who is present in my life, very fortunately. I feel very lucky in that regard. But I wasn't feeling that from God. And I wondered why. And I didn't really talk about it much because, that was the other thing. Like, I can't talk about not feeling God's presence or feeling close to him because, that just meant I was being a bad Christian and, can't have that. And people would like think of me. They would probably think less of me. And I don't know what, but yeah, I just felt like that just wasn't something I could talk about. Now, again, looking back, like I said, I'm not at all trying to vilify any of the other Christians in my life. Like, no one ever told me that, well, if you aren't feeling it, you can't talk about it. Like, yeah, no one ever like explicitly said that, but I just felt like I couldn't, because that is something I do want to say. And this is something I actually was thinking about recently, like looking back and again, feeling very fortunate. My experience, like, as much as I'll go into like all the different things I was taught in church, like growing up throughout like the various different types of churches, how much it kind of fucked me up a little bit. Like I said, I'm just talking about the ideas, the teachings, but not the teachers, not the people in my life. Because I'm, like I said, something I was actually thinking about recently, like the various, like in the church I grew up in, like the various like pastors and like youth pastors specifically that I was closer with, and other leaders in the youth group, like they were all just like such amazing people. And they were so helpful for me in so many ways. So I don't want to make this sound at all like I'm attacking them for, pushing these ideas on me or anything like that. But yeah, I guess I was fortunate. Like there was no, like, again, like you see happening a lot, and not just the Catholic, with Protestant churches as well. So many scandals with certain things adults doing with, children in their care. That was like never a thing. Like at the church I grew up in. So like I said, just a church full of just really, really wonderful people. So I just want to, make sure I point that out and how much I appreciate that. But yeah, but getting back to the whole me wanting more, but it felt like some of the things I was really wanting from God, as far as, like actual direct experience, just being told, and this is something that will be coming up a lot in my story, is being told, well, God doesn't work that way. So you're just going to have to deal with what you do get, and that's going to have to be enough. But it wasn't. So the next phase, say like early adulthood, moving on to college, obviously, going to a different church. So I grew up, for people familiar with the area, I grew up in Springfield, Ohio, moved down here to Cincinnati, where I live now, moved down here for college. So obviously, instead of driving over the hour it is to get back up home for church, started attending a different church down here. And speaking of growing up conservative in every sense of the word, Started having new experiences because like the church I ended up going to ended up being a little more like progressive, a little more liberal. They would actually talk about things like social justice, and um, I would have experiences like meeting Democrats who were actually Christians. Like I didn't think that was like really a thing before. So that was a fun, um, eye-opening experience. So yeah, just that was one of the first times, kind of going out on my own and like hearing different perspectives and ideas. Because there was definitely a point later in life where I went through what you would call, pretty heavy deconstruction. I would say I wasn't necessarily doing that at this point. Again, depends on how you define it. But this is maybe some of the maybe pre-deconstruction kind of happening here. Just hearing things like, again, growing up very fundamentalist, Bible's inerrant. So I was thinking things like, I was very much a young Earth creationist. Okay, the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Noah's flood actually happened. God created the Earth in 6 days. Evolution is obviously evil. Shit like that. So then hearing ideas, I still remember the first time I heard the idea. Oh, the creation story in Genesis. If you look at the ancient Jewish thinking, the way they wrote stories, and like that story wasn't actually meant to be taken literal. I'm like, wait, what? So, but I remember the first time I heard that, it wasn't like I didn't like reject it or I didn't find an aversion to it. I was just like, huh, interesting. So, and again, this is a theme that kind of would come up a lot as I go through my story, is hearing an idea. And it's not so much it changed my mind, but it was more like hearing something that I think my mind was already here. It was just waiting to actually hear it from someone else and to know it was okay to think that. So that's kind of how that felt. So that was maybe like the first little crack in my thinking of the Bible as completely literal and inerrant, infallible, all the things. So yeah, but after a while, I ended up leaving that church, for various reasons. Some of which, like nowadays, I don't know if I would have left it for the same reasons, because I was still, as much as I was changing in certain like aspects, I was still in a lot of ways pretty fundamentalist, and I guess at the time, this was after I was married. Like we'd had both of our kids at this point, and we just felt like, this church, it doesn't really feel like they're going deep enough, into the scripture, and so we want a place that does that a little more like in depth. And so we ended up going to, on the invitation of Matt, my usual co-host, and his wife Erin. They were going to this mega church here in town that we mentioned several times, Crossroads. And we just went there for a weekend, like, because we're like, we need a place to go because we just left our other church, don't have another one yet. So we like went there for a weekend and actually kind of enjoyed it. But so after a while, we was like, okay, we'll just go ahead and attend here. And for people around here who are familiar with that church, they are much more in, I don't know if you would call them like a full-blown like charismatic church. Like they're not Pentecostal or apostolic or anything like that, but there's still a lot more of they still do have an emphasis on things like prophecy and like prophetic prayer, healing prayer, like actually hearing from God, being anointed in the Spirit or baptized in the Spirit or whatever. So after going there for a little while, I started actually having these experiences that I'd been wanting to have like my whole life up to this point. So I was like, like reading scripture and like actually like seeing words like jump off the page at me. He's like, oh, this is what God's saying to me. And like being in small groups with people and having other like guys in the group saying things to me that I said, oh, this is clearly prophetic. Cause like he's saying things to me that there's no way he should know this about me or know that this is what I need to hear right now. This is amazing. And like to the point actually saying like, no one can ever convince me that there's no God. Yeah. Funny. I mean, it felt like the right thing to say at the time. Um, so yeah, starting actually having these experiences, like, okay, like this is what I've been wanting my whole life. This is the kind of thing that I grew up being told, like I shouldn't be expecting, like, but it's happening. Like this has to be real. Um, yeah, and again, another theme that keeps coming up, like no matter where I was along my journey of faith, or even post faith, must admit, it's always weird. People like to point this out. How no matter how many times you change your mind on something, you're always right. Yeah, kind of funny how that always works out. So yeah, so this felt like this is finally where I want to be. So then, that's when the deconstruction started happening. And again, I like to blame my co-host and friend Matt for this, because like he started, like I think it probably started with hearing people like Greg Boyd or Dan Moeller, who seemed to be like just have like very different ideas about specifically when it came to like reading the Bible and like relationship with God and all that kind of stuff. Some of it kind of still meshed with like what Crossroads, like the church we were going to, was doing. Some of it didn't. Um, but yeah, but then, so that was probably maybe like 2017, 2018, I think. So I was like 34, 35 years old at this point, 41 now, just for reference, for people who are curious. So yeah, so that was, so yeah, if people aren't familiar with the people I mentioned, I think specifically one of the biggest ideas that was very different and revolutionary for me was like Greg Boyd, and he's not the only person who espouses this, but he's the person I first heard it from. Just the idea of like they call a progressive revelation, because he would take stories like in the Old Testament specifically, would see all like the violence and genocide and slavery and other words that rhyme with grape, um, and how the Bible seemed to not just allow, but in so many cases like condone or even order, like God commanding all this stuff. So, but his point of view was like, look, like if you read parts of the Bible, it says like God looks like Jesus, specifically Jesus, like on the cross. Like that's the focal point. So basically, if you read anything in the Bible that shows God not looking like Jesus on the cross, meaning like just total love, total self sacrifice, total non-violence, all the things, then because, you can take other verses, I think it's like in Hebrews, that talk about like early, before like only seeing through a mirror dimly, but soon like the veil will be removed and like then we'll see clearly, or there's lots of verses like that. So they like, aha, so that means all these pictures of God that don't look like Jesus, well, that was just like a dim picture. It wasn't the real thing. So I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Sure, that's a great way to kind of explain all that stuff away, because that, speaking of being into apologetics, that was like some tough stuff to defend with people. And I felt like I basically just had to take the approach of, well, look, no matter what God does, it's right. It's just right. So if it doesn't seem right, then just figure out a way to make it right. And if you can't figure out a way, then just, revert back to, well, God's beyond our understandings. His ways are higher than our ways. And how dare you question him, you stupid human, that kind of stuff. But now it's like, oh, finally, a palatable explanation. So, yeah, so that kind of really got like a lot of my wheels spinning in my head. It's like, yeah, sorry, just having one of those moments. Probably gonna have a lot of these this evening where it's completely lose my train of thought. Here, probably need to refer back to my notes. Where was I? Oh yeah, so so the progressive revelation thing. So and And I wasn't viewing it this way at the time, but once I started being more vocal about like those kinds of ideas, a lot of the people I was still friends with or whatever who were still in the more like fundamentalist camp, they started telling me things like, "Oh, you're just making a god in your own image. Like you're just taking the parts of the Bible you want." And but I was like, "No, that's not what I'm doing. I feel like I'm reading the Bible more accurately now than I was before because this must be what it really meant." And so once again, I was like, "Well, this is where I really wanted to be now." Like I feel like God is just love, and anything that doesn't look like love, well, that's not really God because, of course, it's not. Because, like I said, God is love. So, definitionally, any of that like old violent and awful stuff that's in some places in the Bible, that's I feel like I can just not throw it out because that was also part of the whole progressive revelation thing. It was like also the concept of accommodation, and this comes from I think when Jesus was discussing divorce, I don't know if it was in Matthew or which Gospels it was, but when he talked about the reason that God, like through Moses and the law, allowed for divorce is basically because he was like accommodating. He's like, he knew like you people were evil and you were going to do it anyway. So he was just giving you a structure to do it more humanely, specifically, for the woman who, because, back in those days, like if you were a divorced woman, you were basically screwed. It's like, so So they was like, oh, well, if God's accommodating there, that must have been what he was doing. So that even to the point of saying like things like, the genocides, like straight up genocides that like the Israelis were the Hebrews or whatever were committing as they were like conquering the promised land against like the Midianites and the Canaanites, like where they were ordered to just wipe them out completely. It was either wipe them out completely or they could keep the young virgin women for themselves for reasons. But what I was told was like, oh, when God ordered that, he knew that like that's what they were going to do, so he kind of had to condescend or allow um, for that sort of thing to happen because he couldn't just expect them to change overnight and just like, because oh, that's how things were done then. But he just gave them more. What I was told, but the way God told them to do all the genociding was somehow more humane than it was normally done. I don't quite understand why, but yeah. So progressive revelation. God was just meeting people where they were at, allowing them to like go on these like crazy killing sprees and whatever. Because like, what you gonna do? Tell them not to. That's so. But finally, when Jesus came around, okay, now we got the clear picture. So once again, I was like, okay, this is where I've always wanted to be. That now I feel like my faith is really at its peak. Like, yeah, this just feels so much better. I mean, in a lot of ways, at least it did feel better. It was a little freer because I wasn't viewing the Bible as so, rigid and inerrant and infallible and all the things. But yeah, so that, like I said, started in about 2017, 2018, for a couple of years, which brings us to 2020, and we all remember 2020. Pandemic hits. So, and by this time, like I said, I'd been deconstructing to the point where like I was still attending church and was like totally fine with it, but I was like, I just don't know if I agree with all the things they're teaching. But like I was still at this point like being heavily involved in things like me and Matt have talked about, the MASH team, which was like a prayer team for like certain like camping retreats and other things that the church would do. So I mean, by this point, like I was, people talk about, having experiences like we saw some shit, whether it was like healing prayers, like either seeing other people being prayed for and healed, or actually me myself praying for people and them saying they were healed, or again, all kinds of prophetic shit going on, and just thinking, okay, this shit's real. I finally tapped into something here. And then now with the whole view of, and it's not confined by like just what the Bible says. Like it's more like experiential. Like I feel like I finally have a relationship with God, but even looking back, I'm not really. It's just occurring to me now. Like I'm not really sure how much of a relationship I would say. It was really more because this is the thing about deconstruction, and this was the thing I was hearing from the more fundamentalist types, like I said before, where at the time I like totally disagree, but now in a way I kind of agree with them, but in a different way. It's like and looking back on it, it's like, no, I really was like picking and choosing and like making a god of my own image or whatever. Yeah, because it was a God I felt much more comfortable with. So I was like, well, if this God feels better and God is just goodness, then it must be that, the best God I could think of must be the real one because God is goodness, and all that, if that makes sense. Which again, like anyone, like if I start rambling or start being incoherent, please let me know in the comments. So yeah, pandemic hits. Among other things, I ended up being furloughed from my job at the time because I was working for a company that did like audiovisual services for hotel events. So, I mean, public gatherings kind of became illegal. So, um, but at the time, I was actually kind of okay with that because I was actually doing really well. Like I'd gotten like a bunch of promotions. Like I was finally actually making some decent money at it, but I just fucking hated it. For so many reasons. I mean, I love the people I worked with. They were all great, but just like the work itself and just the nature of it and like all the stress and unpredictability of it, I just couldn't deal with. So in a way, being furloughed, I was actually kind of relieved, even though obviously being unemployed sucks. But then the other thing that meant was no longer actually going to church. It's like I said, at the time, I was kind of rethinking like what I really thought about Crossroads, that church we were going to at the time. It was like, so, and if people are familiar with Crossroads, they know like they're very good at the like having an online presence. So like when all these churches like started like shutting down but having to go to online services, I mean they were built for that already. So that was pretty seamless. So we were still watching services online, but then I started also watching more services from like other churches, like specifically again like Greg Boyd's, or like I would just be looking up other preachers or other spiritual leaders or whatever, whether they were attached to a church or not. And I started realizing it's like, okay, I'm still getting pretty much the same stuff, only now I'm able to find voices I kind of agree with more than what I'm hearing from my church. So I'm wondering, like, is it really necessary to like go back? So this is something my wife at the time, we were talking about it, and we're like, yeah, even when they do start services back up, I don't know if we really want to go back anymore, but for various reasons. But I was still like involved with a men's small group at the time, who like guys I was getting really close with. We were still meeting regularly. But yeah, it's just the whole, we just started rethinking. I just started rethinking like just the whole idea of church in general. If you want to hear more of my thoughts around that time period, speaking of which, this is also the time when me and Matt started our first podcast together called Three Beer Gospel, which is kind of what morphed into the Humanity as it is now. Because, it was the pandemic. We were both, not much else going on. We were still, the whole like having a podcast about deconstruction seemed like kind of the thing to do, especially around that time. So yeah, we started a podcast called Three Beer Gospel. I think it was our third episode. For people who like follow us on Facebook, this is one of our one of the pinned posts at the top of the page. Is the link to the Three Beer Gospel podcast page, so you can check that out, or you can just look up Three Beer Gospel on like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever most podcasts are. Yeah, I think it was episode 3. It was called like Post Churchy or something like that, or if you're curious and more of my thoughts on church around that time, you can watch or listen to that. It's also on YouTube. We did a couple for that podcast. I think we only did 2 video episodes. But anyway, here I am, a rambling. So yeah, pandemic, lose my job, started picking up like I think I was a driver for Amazon for a little while, which was cool, but kind of sucked, that. So then 2021 still might go down as one of the most pivotal years in my entire life. So I guess it maybe actually started back in 2020. Like, speaking of, back in my head, I noticed there was if people notice, I have tons of moles and like all kinds of little skin weird things. But I noticed one on the back of my head. It's like, it's maybe starting to get a little bigger. It's bleeding a lot. And I was like, but again, I had hair at this point, so it wasn't really as obvious. I was like, it's kind of annoying. But also, this being 2020, getting into a doctor's appointment for something that's not like life-threatening, a little harder to do. And I was a little more hesitant to do at the time as well. So I was like, we'll see. So, but it just kind of kept growing and growing and growing and then growing and growing and growing. Till finally, it was about, I think by the time I finally got it in to really get looked at, it was like 5 or 6 centimeters across and like maybe about that thick. For a fortunate few have actually seen it in photos or in person. If anyone's curious, I can share them. But maybe I think that's one of the things we talk about on our podcast. If we ever started a Patreon, that'll be one of our tiers. You can actually see like my gross like head growth photos. So if anyone's interested, let me know. But yeah, finally got in to get it looked at by a dermatologist at the end of January of 2021. And she just like removed it. And she's like, yeah, that's weird. Here, I'll take it off. I'm like, thank you so much. That thing was fucking annoying. So yeah, I think Emily saw it. I think yeah. That's a good way to describe it. So finally got taken off at the end of January, and then I found out early February, got the call from my dermatologist. It's cancer. So now, most people, I think when they hear skin cancer, they're like, oh, skin cancer. Which sometimes, yeah, I mean, all cancer is cancer still, but skin cancer, it's like, okay, you get it removed, you're fine. But thing is, there's a few different types of skin cancer. I think there's 3 types. There's 2 types that are maybe, I don't know if they're more common, but they're a little less harmless as far as cancer goes. But then there's the 3rd kind, melanoma. That's what I was lucky enough to have. Not only was it melanoma, which if people know anything about melanoma, just on its own, it's super aggressive, super dangerous. But mine was like particularly dangerous and aggressive and treatment resistant. So I saw just firsthand like how fast it grew. But so for anyone who knows the terminology, if you don't know what any of this stuff means, don't worry about it. It basically just means extra fucking dangerous. So it was nodular. It was ulcerated. It had an NRAS mutation. So yeah, all that to say, super fucking dangerous, super aggressive, all that. And good morning, I guess, to David Larry Carroll. Not sure where you're watching from. Let me know where you're watching from, wherever it is morning. That's exciting. Hope you're having a good morning wherever you're at, buddy. Yeah, so where was I? So yeah, I was not having a good morning at the time. So I'm like, okay, fuck, I have cancer. But they're like, okay, but like we removed the tumor. Okay, so next steps are go in for scans, see if it's spread anywhere else, just kind of go from there. So I did have some scans, and like the only place it was showing up that I noticed I had like another like little bump just like under the skin, like a few inches down from where it was. He said, okay, it looks like it has spread there. It's like it's actually like right next to a lymph node, but it looks like it hasn't actually gone into the lymph node. But we'll have some surgery, remove more from the site, remove the lymph node, see what happens. So I had some surgery. They removed more from around where the primary tumor was, and they removed that lymph node. And like, okay, where they removed from the primary site, they had what are known as clear margins, which in cancer speak, that's really good. That means when whatever my dermatologist took off, she got all the cancer that was there. Or when she cauterized it, maybe killed whatever was left. And then when they took the lymph node out and that little node or whatever little bump, like, all right, the bump, yeah, that was melanoma too, so it had spread there, but the lymph node was clear. So, oh, Texas. Wait, is it morning? Am I the? Have I lost that much concept of like time and everything? But yeah. Oh, well, thank you for your heart going out to me, but just wait. My story gets better. So, what's where it was? Oh, yeah. So they removed the lymph node. The lymph node is actually clear. So they're like, okay, looks like we may have got it. Like we did like a full body scan, like nothing else was showing up. But we know like melanoma is a persistent bastard that likes to kind of spread everywhere. So they started me on immunotherapy. People who aren't familiar with immunotherapy, it's kind of like chemotherapy, but not really. Like it's very similar as in like how it's administered. Basically, you go into your oncologist, they hook you up to an IV and they inject it over like a half hour or so. But whereas chemotherapy is basically just target any kind of fast growing cells, because that's what cancer is. But then that's also why it causes you to do things like lose your hair or makes you nauseous because, hair, fast growing cells, like there's a lot of fast growing cells in your stomach lining. It also like can kind of fuck up your white blood cells and stuff like that. So, all right. Well, I'm glad I got your ear. Let's see if I can keep it. Appreciate you, David. Yeah, thanks for coming. But immunotherapy, the way it works, it's a relatively new treatment, especially for melanoma, like just in the past 5 to 10 years or so. What it does, and again, this is just my very like layman's knowledge, like look this shit up. It's fantastic. So what immunotherapy does, it essentially marks your cancer cells in such a way to get your natural immune system to start attacking it. So I'm like, so they started me on immunotherapy and I had like almost no side effects. Like I was like a little extra tired, like for a couple of days after getting my injections, but it was so slight. It was hard to tell if that was from immunotherapy or just from life, just being a little extra tired. All right. So that was so it was in March of 2021. I had my surgery, then started immunotherapy. And then they're like, okay, we'll keep you on immunotherapy. You seem to be doing great with it, just to make sure we got everything. And then in a couple months, we'll do another round of full body scans, see where we're at. But, we're optimistic. We think we might have got it all. Okay. So June 2021, just over 3 years ago now. It was early June. Full body scans come back. And it's everywhere. Like, I don't think the PET scan that I had, I don't think they even counted all the tumors. They just said, all right, you got some here, several here. And they were like sizes ranging from like several millimeters across to like a couple centimeters across. They were in both of my lungs. I think I had 2 in one lung, 1 in the other. They were like in like the tissue surrounding my heart. They were like somewhere else up here in my chest. They were like around my intestines, around my kidneys. I had one all the way down in my left leg. I'm just like, fuck. So then they're like, all right, well, apparently the immunotherapy we had you on, so it's great that it wasn't having any side effects, but apparently it wasn't having any actual effects either. So switched me to 2 other immunotherapies, Opdivo and Yervoy. Awesome stuff. I was on Keytruda before, for those keeping track at home. So they're like, okay, we'll put you on these. Hope that does the trick. If not, we'll have to see where we go from there. Maybe looking at some kind of more experimental shit, but we'll see. So like I said, they had found some like kind of like in the tissue around my heart, but apparently with the PET scans, when it comes to like the heart itself, it's not as accurate. Because with most full body scans, it's like it's all how you're supposed to like remain completely still. Well, your heart, thankfully, doesn't remain completely still. But then later in another one of my checkups, they noticed like something going on with my heart. It sounded like I had a little bit of a heart murmur. So they're like, that's weird. They're like, said, those famous last words, probably unrelated to the cancer, but hey, we'll check it out. Go in July of 2021 for an echocardiogram. And they find a over 2 centimeter across mass inside my heart. And they're like, well, that shouldn't be there. So I remember I went in it was first thing in the morning to get the echo. They do the echo. I go home, go back to work because I'm working from home at this point. So then I get a call at about 11:30 from my oncologist office from the nurse. They're like, hey, Mr. Stewart, they found something on the echocardiogram. Can you get to the hospital right now? I'm like, oh, yeah. So I go to the hospital, have to get a cardiac MRI. It is like much more targeted as far as like how it scans through the heart, and was there overnight. And long story short, that mass was, I don't remember the exact proportions, but it was roughly half and half tumor and blood clot. So we're like, because like at this point, like I knew, okay, the cancer had spread. I'm stage 4 at this point. Like the doctors haven't told me anything. Like they haven't said terminal. They haven't said incurable. They haven't used the just try to keep you comfortable like type of language. It still felt like, okay, we have options. There's things we can do. I mean, they definitely seemed concerned, and I was concerned, but I was like, it still feels like, something could happen. But like at this point, I was like, okay, it's in my heart. Knowing how fast this fucker grew, like when it was on my head, like at this point, I was convinced this was it. And that's still something I'm processing, trying to work through. Because like at the time, a lot of this wasn't really sinking in. Because I had people like all the time telling me things like, oh, you're being so brave. I don't know how you're making it through this. And I'm glad it was. Yeah, spoiler alert. I'm still alive. Oh, you're welcome. Oh yeah, that's so speaking of like people like tell me, oh, you're so brave, and like I don't know how you get through this, and like because again, like I was saying, how I wasn't really nervous about like sharing my story. I was more just like nervous just about the whole like there's going to be so much I'm going to forget, and I'm just going to be awkward and whatever. Because when it comes to like sharing my story, there's a meme I've seen recently that I love. It says like people tell me, oh, you're so brave for sharing your story about all that's happened. It's like, no, I'm not brave. It's just that shit keeps happening to me and I can't shut up. Is that our plant? That's actually, yeah. I don't know if you've seen the show before, David, but that's actually a good call out. Yes, that is our unofficial show mascot, Robbie P. Short for Robert Plant. Those in the know. But anyway, so yeah, so at the time, oh, well, thank you, David. I'm glad I'm alive too. And I'm glad this is fascinating. And yeah, I'm glad I'm here to do anything. So here's to me. Fuck it. Ah, man. So yeah, I remember going through this. Like I said at the time, like things were just happening so fast. Like things like I still kind of had an idea of the severity of the situation, but yeah, I guess this is maybe another like blessing or curse, depending on how you look at it, of whatever neurodivergences I may have, is like the gift of disassociation. Like sometimes things just don't sink in. But whatever you say, Chris. Yeah, you mess with Chris, you're dealing with whatever I'm pretending I have here. So love you, buddy. All right. But yeah, people telling me, "Oh, you're so brave. I don't know how you're doing so well going through this," because I like would post about like my story a lot, and share like all the updates and like just be very candid about stuff. Oh, the show from that link you gave in the asylum. Hey, Tiffany. Hey, I think Tiffany's here. Yeah, she waved earlier. Like, well, cool. Well, welcome. Glad to have some new viewers if you're a new viewer. But yeah, always appreciate you here and the appreciate the interaction. But anyway, so man, y'all are distracting me with the comments, but I love it. Keep it up. So yeah, just that whole like people telling me, "Oh, you're so brave," like for how you're handling this, and honestly, it was just all happening so fast. And yes, Tiffany is here. What are you doing there? Sorry. Restream was being weird for a second. Hello again. Well. Now the pressure's on, I guess. Gotta keep you on the hook, I guess. But yeah, it was such a weird thing being told by people like how like brave I was being, or even like inspirational, because I'm like, really, all I'm doing is all I know how to do, like at any at any given time. It's like I said, things were just happening so fast. It was like all the different news I was getting and like all the doctor's appointments. And like, so for me, it was literally just like, it didn't really feel like I was having to like choose to do anything. Or it was just like, I'm just going to the next doctor's appointment and doing what they tell me to do, or letting them inject me with the shit, or going to the hospital when they want me at the hospital, having some pictures taken, all that. It was like another friend of mine, Chelsea. I don't know if she's watching now or later, but also went through cancer. I don't remember if it was the exact same time, maybe before or around the same time, but I love how she put it, because she talked about like getting that message from people like, "Oh, you're being so brave. I love how you're like soldiering through this." And like her reactions, like, well, what else am I supposed to do? Just like sit at home and wait to die? Like, so yeah. So yeah, for me, it was just taking everything a day at a time. It didn't even feel like, a lot of people talk about cancer being like, "Oh, it's a battle, it's a fight." And like, I didn't even really feel like I was fighting, because also, fun fact, actual fun fact, super weird apparently though, even though I was like full on like stage 4 cancer, like I said, just body just riddled with tumors, I always felt completely fine. Like, never felt anything from the cancer itself. The only thing I felt was, well, we'll get to this part soon. Because I remember like going on like different like online forums and Facebook groups, like talking about it, like, "Oh yeah, I'm stage 4. Here's where all the tumors." Like people would be like asking me things like, "Oh, well, what are you taking for pain management?" And I'm like, nothing. I don't have any pain. And they're like, "Really?" So that, as I guess as much of a meme as it is sometimes with the whole kind of superficial, how we ask everyone, "How you doing?" And we just say, okay, like literally, like at this point in my life, like when people ask me like, "How are you?" I had no idea how to answer, because I'm like, I feel fine, but apparently I'm not. And I really don't know what to do with this. So, man, now my arms are tired. I'm not used to gesturing. This is weird. I'm also not used to talking this much, like on my own. Throat's getting old, dried out. Sorry, I'm probably gonna go all Marco Rubio on you for a while. Where was I? So yeah, tumor in my heart, among other places. And I'm like, fuck. So, like I said, as much as things maybe hadn't started sinking in until that point, I was like, okay, now this is feeling real. And because, like I said, knowing how fast like the tumor I did see grew and how aggressive all this shit was, I'm like, not only is this probably it, but I probably don't have long. And this was later confirmed by my oncologist. Like I said, hey, I'm fine now. Sorry for the spoilers, but talking with her later, I remember asking her, like, okay, so had I not gone into remission when I did, how long did I have? And she just said, not long. It's like one of my memories was, okay, so after they found it in my heart, they're like, okay, immunotherapy, we just switch you up to new immunotherapy. Like I said, it's great. It's apparently does wonders with melanoma, at least recently, is what we're finding. But the problem is, immunotherapy can take a while. It can be very effective, but it can take a while. You may not have a while. So we're going to go much more aggressive. We're going to do a couple rounds of chemotherapy. For people who are in the know with chemo, I did what was known as the CVD regimen. Stands for cisplatin, vinblastine, and dacarbazine, which meant me going to the hospital for 4 days to receive it because they gave it to me like every day for 4 days. And apparently, even as far as chemo goes, this stuff is like hardcore shit. Like I remember the appointment with my oncologist with her explaining the chemo. She actually, so when I was asking her about the drug and what's like, she actually had to like go on her desk and like pull out some papers. Like, oh, I'm gonna have to look this up because I haven't actually given this stuff to anyone in a while. I'm like, oh, cool. So yeah, and I remember because again going back to the whole like me saying like I feel completely fine. I remember like telling that to her in one of my appointments, like after like we found out I was stage 4. I was like, I'm still feeling fine. And I still remember her like saying to me, "Is like, all right, well, I'm glad you're feeling great, but like enjoy these days where you're still feeling good because." I don't remember her exact words. It's basically something to the effect of, you don't know how many of these you're going to have left. So enjoy them. So I'm like, oh, cool. Let's see. David says, got Akamera and know how to use it. Keep doing it. I'm not familiar with what you're talking about. So if you'd like to elaborate, feel free. But yeah, so thinking, okay, going to have to go to the hospital for chemo. But yeah, like I said, with just thinking, okay, this is probably it. As far as timeline, I didn't really necessarily have any concept of how long it would take. But like I said, I knew it probably wouldn't be long. But I do remember the first week I was in the hospital, that Tuesday was my son's 10th birthday. And so the weekend before, we were celebrating his birthday with family. And I just remember, like, bringing out the cake and singing happy birthday to him and, like, just thinking to myself, this could be the last time I sing happy birthday to my son. Fortunately, it wasn't. But yeah, but speaking of like the people in my life, when people ask me, well, how did you make it through all that? How did you keep your spirits up? How did you keep going? Like, I'll tell you exactly how. And it was because of the people in my life. Like, I don't know how I would have made it without like all the friends and family who supported me. And like specifically in the instance of like that being my son's birthday, like while I was in the hospital, like we had friends who came together and like threw a birthday party for him, including like buying him presents, bringing him cake. Like they came over to the house. Like I wasn't there obviously, but they were like sending me pictures and everything. And like I was like in the hospital, like looking at the pictures, reading the messages about it, like literally in tears. Like I just, yeah. So again, if any like the folks who did that are watching, I still means the world to me that you did that for my dude. But yeah, so yeah, did 2 rounds of chemo in the hospital. And I said, okay, we'll do 2 rounds of chemo, do another round of body scans, see where we're at, see if we're seeing any improvement. Okay, we'll continue with the chemo. If things aren't looking good, then we're going to have to go to some like clinical trial stuff, which, could be who knows what. So yeah, so it was in August and early September when I did my rounds of chemo. And I'll always remember this date. September 7th, 2021. Go in for my full body PET scan, my head and neck MRI. And I see the results. And I see the words, complete metabolic response to therapy. Now, I had no idea what the fuck that meant. But fortunately, and again, I'm seeing these results. Like I have an app through my hospital, so I actually see the results sometimes even before my doctor does, because they're just like posted immediately. Now, fortunately, I have a father who is a now retired pathologist, so basically he knows the terminology. So basically, I'm able to, like, anytime I got my results, I'm able to call him on the phone and read them and say, "Hey, here's what it says. What does that mean?" So I just remember reading that to him. It's like, it says complete metabolic response to therapy. And I remember him almost like, and for people who know my dad, he started like getting emotional. like for people who know my dad, like that's rare. So he was like, this is exactly what we were wanting. He's like, so basically, okay, complete metabolic response to therapy so anyone doesn't know what that means. And I went through the report and how it was describing everything. Basically, everything was just fucking gone. Like just gone. Just like that. And as much as I didn't know what to do with I'm probably dying, I really didn't know what to do with this. Other than obviously be like ecstatic and completely relieved and, lots of these. But, because another thing I kind of forgot to mention leading into that was, so as I was going through the whole experience of being stage 4, which apparently also, side note, I'm still actually considered stage 4, even though I'm in full remission now. Because I guess I don't know if this is just a general cancer thing or more specifically with melanoma, just because the chance of recurrence with melanoma is so high. Basically, what my oncologist told me is you'll always be considered stage 4 just for the purposes of we're always going to be like keeping an eye on you and like making sure it doesn't come back. So I still have like routine body scans, and they actually kept me on immunotherapy for about 2 years after going into remission, like, which I'm off of now, because I guess they found out, because originally the plan was immunotherapy indefinitely, but I guess literally just last year, some studies came out, which long story kind of short, which I know way too late for that at this point, but I guess the kind of cancer I had, with the kind of treatment I had and the timeline I had the treatment and how quickly it went away, basically these studies are showing that this shit just doesn't come back, which for melanoma is a fucking miracle, like a medical miracle. So they're just like, I think we can take you off immunotherapy. I mean, I'm still doing the full body scans. Those have continued to come back completely clean. But yeah. But anyway, where the fuck was I? So yeah, remission. Help me out, notes. Yeah. Oh yes. So while I was like actually stage 4, because I remember at that point, like I still considered myself a Christian, but I think a lot of the ideas I was just like ready to let go of, like so many of them, and just now, and also fortunately by this point I was a universalist, so the whole I think I'm probably dying with like, no matter what I think, I'm still going to heaven. It's all good. So I just kind of felt free to kind of be open and with my beliefs and thoughts and everything. So, but then, and I also remember, I think it was the first time I was in the hospital. I don't know if they were a chaplain or something, but someone with the hospital. It was Christ Hospital here in Cincinnati. So it's a Catholic hospital. But also, side note, hopefully you don't need them for this, but if you ever have cancer, highly recommend Christ Hospital here in Cincinnati. Absolutely wonderful experience. Everyone there is amazing, from the doctors to the nurses to everybody, PCAs. Like, I actually, in some ways, miss my time in the hospital just because of how wonderful everyone was there. Even now that I don't have as many like appointments, like I really miss seeing all my doctors and nurses as regularly as I used to. But anyway, so, but this, I think it was a chaplain. She came in, but she was like, it wasn't that she was like non-faith. It was just more like not specifically any particular kind of faith, but basically just someone who came around to the room saying, hey, like, would you want like prayer or anything? And I remember when she came and like asked if I wanted prayer. Again, at this point, still considering myself Christian, just thinking it was weird because this is just what I felt was like, nah, no thanks. I don't think so. Because, okay, sorry, going to have to rewind a little bit more here. Okay, so going back to that spring, this was, I think, before I found out I was stage 4, but it's still into the after surgery. We think we might have got it, but you're on immunotherapy. And also at this time, I was still like kind of searching for a job because I had to leave the Amazon job because I had cancer and surgery, so I couldn't do the delivery thing anymore. And also we had to sell our house we were living in at the time because with me not making as much money, we had to downsize significantly. And so that was the whole thing. So I had some friends from the church and like some connected with the prayer group I was in who said, well, we want to come over to your house and pray for you and all the things you have going on. And I was like, okay. Because like I said, like this was still at a point, it's like, I'm not really quite sure what I think of this church or how I used to think of it, or like I was, yeah. So I was like, okay, this is the thing, the whole prayer thing, especially like healing prayers, prayers for miracles and all that. And like was totally into that. It's like, I'm not sure where I am with that anymore, but yeah, people, basically bottom line, friends want to come over because they care about me and they want to pray for me. Cool. Let's just do it. See what happens. So they come over and pray for me, but I remember that was one of the experience out of faith that like kind of really solidified me. Okay, this place I was where I thought, okay, this is where I really want to be in my faith, or I'm finally feeling all the things I want to feel, like all that. That was one of the experiences that told me, okay, I am not at that place anymore, because like the whole thing for me, like, and if any of these friends are watching, like, do not take this in any sort of slight or anything negative towards you at all. Because like I said, I know it was done out of love for me and I appreciate the fuck out of it. But the whole thing to me just felt so awkward. And at some, I kind of hate to say it, but like, honestly, a couple parts of it felt a little dirty because it wasn't just praying for the healing, praying for the selling of the house, praying for the finding of a job. Because also a part of this whole team and like prophetic, whatever, prayer, whatever, there was also a bit of a like conviction aspect to it. So part of it was them having me like almost like basically confessing. So like at one point, the guy asked there were 3 people there. And one of the guys who was kind of leading it a bit asked me, okay, if Jesus were here right now, what would you ask him? So part of this was, like I said, like, so of the 3 people, I was like good friends with one of them. This other guy who was asking the question, like I'd met him, was kind of familiar with him, seemed cool. But then the third person, total stranger. Like I'd maybe heard of him, but like, okay, another guy connected with the prayer group. He's probably cool. Okay. So this guy who I kind of knew, he's like asking me these questions. Like, so part of it is just me, just like, again, being very introverted, probably social anxiety, maybe autism, other things. Just kind of being put on the spot. Answer a question right now. I'm like, especially when it's like, what do you want to say to Jesus? This is obviously big deal kind of thing. And I'm like, so I'm like, first I'd be like, I'd probably just ask for a hug because I feel like I need a hug right now. And then, so that actually led to a really cool moment. So like me and all the people in the group, we just all like shared a hug. It's like, oh, that was cool. And then I was like, also, I know with everything going on, I know like my wife and my family have been under a lot of stress. So I guess help just being a better husband to them and whatever. So then after that, the guy tells me, so I noticed when we asked you what you would ask Jesus, you're like, well, all this stuff going on, like with your cancer situation and you're trying to sell your house and like all this stuff. You didn't ask him to help you with any of that. Then he said, that's a problem. I'm like, okay, first, I didn't actually say any of this. Like in the moment, I was just like, oh, okay, just did the whole like, submissive, okay, spiritual authority dude. Okay, fine. But in my head, I'm like, the fuck, dude? Like, I just asked Jesus for a hug and to be a better husband and father. Like, what the fuck is wrong with that? And you're telling me I have a problem. Just because being put on the spot, I didn't think of all the right things to say that you think I should have said. But speaking of the whole asking Jesus to heal me, sell the house, we'll get to that. Like, I realize we've been going for an hour and a half now. I still feel like I'm only just getting started when it comes to all the shit I've been wanting to get into. But anyway, but then at another part, speaking of the whole like confession thing, he was like having me do a whole like, okay, repeat after me kind of prayer. And I still feel dirty for saying this, but like I said, at the time, I was just in a total, just go with it and whatever. Just because also at this point, I was just like already feeling that whole, okay, this kind of prayer thing is not where I'm at anymore. Let's just get through this. Like I said, I know these are friends who are just trying to love on me. I want to accept that part of it and just get through this as quickly as possible and as amicably as possible and just cooperate, whatever. But I don't remember all of the prayer that he was having me pray through. But I just remember the one line that he wanted me to say. He was like, God, I'm a broken dude. And that was really what told me this is not where I am at anymore. Because that is not how I viewed myself. That is not how I thought I was supposed to view myself. That's not how I thought God viewed me at that point. I was just like, yeah. Need a drink now. Just think about it. But yeah, I also wanted to bring up that prayer experience. Like I said, so at this point in the timeline, this was before I had found out I was stage 4 and before things had gotten really bad. But yeah, may come back to that aspect of it later. So anyway, so now I'm in remission. Like I said, and through various things, already feeling like whatever faith I had was not really there anymore. Like I still believed in God. Like I wasn't quite sure about the whole like Christian label thing, but it's like, but the thing about thinking that you're dying and then not. Because another thing I remember from back, like after getting my cancer diagnosis, but before things were looking really bad, like I remember saying to some friends, I think it was in the small group, I was like church Bible study, whatever, at the time, like telling the guys, like when things were looking like, okay, it looks like I'm going to pull through, everything's going to be fine. Just thinking about how you hear a lot of stories from people who go through something like cancer or other sort of illness or hardship or whatever, and they pull through on the other side and like, oh, this totally changed my life. I got a new perspective, a new outlook. Now I'm going to like climb Mount Everest or write a book or start a business or, travel the world or whatever. And it's like, that just sounds kind of overwhelming for me. I don't want to, I kind of want to just relax. Like, so that's why I was like, that's why among other reasons at the time, I was like, I'm glad this isn't looking too serious because I don't want to have to deal with the whole, oh, now I got a whole new outlook on life. And like, I don't need any more change right now. But after going through that and coming out on the other side, like, God fucking damn it, I have a new perspective on life now. And I'm like, ugh. Still no plans on writing a book, in case anyone's interested. Still no plans on climbing Mount Everest, because like another meme, like memes are a big part of my life. If you haven't noticed, memes and GIFs or GIFs, however they're pronounced. I like to call it GIFs. GIFs, I found out, are a love language of mine. Also, I found out a big thing for people of various neurodivergences. That's kind of our language. But anyway, another meme I saw talking about like motivation and like, climbing that mountain. It's like, just remember, every corpse on Mount Everest was once a highly motivated person. So I'm like, point taken. No need to climb that mountain. So just dealing with, not just what happened to the whole like thinking I'm dying and then not, but just how quickly it happened and how little time my brain, like I said, my brain has a hard time processing stuff under normal circumstances. So like after all that, like, keep doing this. Well, I appreciate it. Like that's basically, and like I said, hopefully get into that. Like I said, I know I've been going for a while, but I feel like I'm just going to keep going until I'm done. Hopefully y'all are fine hanging out. If you've seen this show, you're probably used to longer episodes. I think with Tiffany, we went like 4 hours. I'm hopefully not going to go that long, but we'll see. So coming off of that, like, as much as I hated the cliche of it, it's like, okay, I really do have a new perspective on life now. Now I really am rethinking like literally everything, because so I wish I had popcorn, but you folks at home, get you some. Because like I said, normally for people who like consider themselves faithful or Christian, or I think even people who would maybe consider themselves on the complete opposite side, like where I am now, just like no faith, no religion, no relationship with God, nothing. It seems like this kind of circumstance usually drives people more towards the like faith, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, whatever. And that like strengthens their faith. Because like, speaking of, what David said about hooray for miracles. Because like, I say amen to that, as in like, I believe in the miracle of modern medicine. But yeah, like I said, had this happened to me just a couple of years earlier, this would have been absolutely something where coming out of it, I was like, okay, my faith is stronger now. Like I really believe, because look what God did for me. Right. So this is another one for those who say that those of us who lose faith In so many words, just do it for the easy way out. The easy thing would have been to just fall back on what I had known my whole life. And I say the easy answer. And again, I don't want anyone to take what I'm saying as a criticism of those who do think this way. All I'm saying is for me to think this way just wouldn't have been the honest thing. And for me, it would have just been taking the easy way out. So please don't take this as any kind of projection on anyone else. Like I said at the beginning, I'm just sharing where I'm at and why I'm here, not saying why anyone else should be here. But yeah, for anyone who says, like those of us who lose faith, just do it because we want things to be easier. Coming off of thinking you're dying is a terrible time. To lose your entire concept of like the basis of how you view reality. Because like whereas before I would have had a faith or something to fall back on, but now like losing faith at the same time as this, and I'll go more into why. But and usually when people use this phrase, it's in a very positive sense, especially coming out of a circumstance like this. But for me, it was a horrifying, frightening, very daunting sense of now I'm starting over. Because now I'm trying to make sense of life and death and reality and everything without the basis upon which I had based all of that for my entire life. And now where I'm at, yeah, totally agree with Brittany here. Like, nah, it was way harder when I was in the mindset of God works in mysterious ways. Oh, and that phrase, I will get to that fucking phrase. Because that was the message that in my days where I was still like in the faith, and it was still what I was hearing from like the people in my community who were still in the faith. They're like, look what God did for you. And honestly, even like I said, while I was going through like the thick of it, like I was stage 4, I was pretty sure I was dying. Like I was definitely hoping for healing, but the whole idea of like praying to God, oh, please heal me because you love me so much, just still felt, and maybe this is why, going back to that whole prayer experience, why when the guy asked me, oh, what do you want to say to Jesus right now? Like the top of my mind wasn't heal me, because even when I was like a staunch, like devout Christian, like fully in it, the whole idea of God like singling people out for like healing or miracles or whatever just didn't really sit right with me for a while. I remember going back as far as, if people remember, when those like terrible tornadoes came through Joplin, Missouri. I don't remember what year this was. It was a while ago. But I do remember the Sunday after those tornadoes, we were actually visiting family. So we were visiting their church. And again, this pastor said, to this day, maybe one of my absolute favorite things I've ever heard in a sermon ever. Because usually what you hear from the people who make it through, like, disasters or tragedies or whatever like this is, oh, thank God for sparing me. He blessed me and let me survive. Like, meanwhile, like, how many people died? So what this pastor said, and like I said, it still sits with me, and like, even though like I'm not viewing it as a Christian anymore, but still absolutely totally glad he said it. He said, okay, if you go through, and I don't remember his exact words, forgive me, but it's essentially what he was saying was, okay, if you make it through a tragedy like this, be very careful about using language like God spared me or God blessed me or God allowed me to survive, because think of how that's going to sound to the people who lost someone. So that stuck with me. And even like another experience I actually did experience, I think it was in 2018. So still, like I said, still very much Christian, kind of deconstructing. I was on a trip with my church, through my church or this other organization or whatever I was volunteering with. Yeah. Anyway, we were in India, and we were leaving one city going to another. And so people who know like India, that part of the world, this was in their like monsoon season. But as we were leaving one town and going to another, we were all on the bus. We were like out of the town, well on our way, and we got a call from a contact back in the previous city, and they said, "Oh man, right after you left, we just started getting these heavy rains. There's all kinds of flooding. It's like, man, if you hadn't left when you did, like you would have been stuck here." And like so everyone on the bus was like, "Oh, listen to that! Praise God for letting us get out." And I just remember sitting there in the middle of all that, going like, "What about all the people who are still there, though?" God not blessing them? What? Why are we so special? I don't get it. So then, when it came to me being healed miraculously, whatever, like that's just a thought I just could not shake. Because like, not only did I not feel right asking for God to like single me out for something special. Now that it actually happened, I'm like, how can I claim that God did something special for me? That, of course, by the way, like I mentioned with immunotherapy and like treatments for melanoma, apparently just in the past like 5 to 10 years or so have like just like skyrocketed in terms of like effectiveness and everything. So I'm like, okay, so my blessing apparently coincided with the way modern medicine was developing anyway. So if I'm going to claim that God loved me so much and healed me, what about all these like probably millions of people who for thousands of years probably have been dying of the same goddamn thing that I had? Does he not love them? Like, what am I saying when I say God healed me? I just couldn't. So that got me thinking. So then that obviously like takes your mind to other thing. Okay, but the one thing, like I said, throughout my Christian faith, I basically ran the full gamut of at least like the Protestant branch of Christianity. But one thing that was constant was like all good things come from God. So if something good in your life happens, praise God for it. Give God the glory for it. Give him the credit. He is obviously the one who did it. But I'm like, but if that doesn't make sense to me, like what else does that mean? So So coming out of remission, I think this is the point where I probably wasn't quite atheist yet, but I was definitely on my way. It wasn't long after that I got there. So at this point, I was in like several. Sorry, I need some water. Probably can need some more scotch here in a minute. Speaking of folks at home, let me know if you're enjoying anything this evening. Let me know what you're drinking, or if you're being smart and just staying hydrated. Where was I? Help me out, notes. Oh yes, so I still like at this point, like coming out of remission. I don't know if. Oh, thanks, Kif. Slanjaba. For those who don't speak Gaelic, cheers. Good health or whatever. L'chaim. So yeah, I don't know if at this point, coming right out of remission, if I still consider myself a Christian. I still definitely thought, okay, I still believe in God. I'm just not sure what is going on. But like I said, I was involved. I was particularly, there was this one podcast I was listening to going through the deconstruction called Heretic Happy Hour. It's actually where I know Derek Day from. He used to be one of the hosts on there. And there was a Facebook group associated with the podcast. It was all about deconstruction and conversation. Met a lot of cool people like through that group that I'm actually still friends with, including Derek, Keith, our guest on last week's episode, someone I met through that group, like so many others through there. I'm sorry if I would go through all your names, but I know I'd be forgetting someone's, but you know who you are. And I love the hell out of all of you. That I'm still in contact with. Also, spoiler alert, ended up leaving the group. So it was in that group where like, okay, here's a group of like very open-minded people who have like all kinds of different ideas about God. And I'm like, okay, I need to figure some shit out. So it was almost like I just felt like I'm just going to start asking questions and just trying to figure shit out with these people. And so in a way, I kind of feel bad because like looking back, it's like you are almost like my... like I was just kind of performing experiments or whatever and just kind of, but yeah, hopefully I didn't come across as too harsh in some of my like questioning, but I feel like maybe some people definitely got pissed at me looking back on it, but in ways I still don't quite understand. Maybe that's the tism. I don't know. But anyway, so anyway, at this point, like I said, coming off of surviving cancer, and just like reevaluating like literally everything. Cause like now, like my faith isn't what it was. It's not where it used to be. I'm like, I don't know. I literally don't know what I think about anything anymore. So I'm like, okay, let's just look for something that I can hold on to. And this is where I really started to see the shortcomings of like, because I considered myself a progressive Christian, coming out. So this is where I really started seeing where that was like kind of coming up empty and the whole like deconstruction thing. Oop. Sorry. Looks like I lost you there for a second. Oh, you got a little sneak peek of something I'm going to be sharing later. Here, let me know if anyone recognized who that face was. I'm curious. But anyway, I think where you lost me probably was talking about, okay, realizing the limits of like progressive Christianity, because basically I just started asking questions, like, because people would say things about God, and I basically like, the question I just kept coming back to was, okay, you're saying this about God, whether it's, like I said, going back to the whole like progressive revelation thing, where like, okay, God looks like Jesus, so if any picture of God doesn't look like Jesus, that's not real. What I just kept asking people is, okay, how do you know? Because like with that specific example, say, oh, well, God looks like Jesus, so anything in the Bible that doesn't look like Jesus got it wrong. It's like, okay, well, how do we know that Jesus didn't get it wrong? What if God really does look like the whole like genocidal, megalomaniacal, jealous maniac that he looks like in the Old Testament, and the Jesus stuff got it wrong? Or how do we know, which again, like going back to like my experience, like how do I know that God like favored me somehow? Well, again, like I said, letting all these other people die of the same damn thing that I had. Like, okay, and I just kept asking, like, any claim that anyone would give me about God, I would say, okay, how do you know? And the more I kept pushing on that, the more I realized when I would ask, how do you know? Like, they never did. It always came back to, oh, this is just what I choose to believe, in so many words. Which I'm like, okay, cool, fine, if that's what you choose to believe, but I'm looking for something that I can actually, that I don't have to choose to believe, that just is real for me. And I just kept getting so frustrated because anytime I would wonder like why there's no like proof or anything I can hold on to, I just get, well, again, going back to a message I had heard before from the other end of the spectrum of Christianity. Well, that's not how God works. But then they're also telling me that, well, he's like so mysterious, the whole mysterious ways thing, and he's beyond our understanding, beyond our comprehension. It's like, okay, well, then how do you know he works that way if he's beyond our understanding? How do you understand that about him? And then again, it came back to, well, this is what I choose to believe. Like, okay, well, that's what you choose to believe, but why? And I found my answer for that later, but I'll get to that in a bit too. So yeah, I just kept getting frustrated with the lack of any kind of answers, especially given the nature of the God they were proposing, which is one that is all loving and wants a relationship with me and everyone. And whether or not you believe that like hell is on the line, like I said, I was a universalist, like coming out of Christianity, and at this point, and a lot of the people I was talking with were as well. So even as a universalist, you still think, okay, it's still of vital importance to get to know God and relate to Him, like now in this life, because that's what He really wants. I'm like, okay, but then why is He so distant and mysterious and beyond our understanding? Because I mean, think about this. God wants a relationship with us, to actually like relate with us, like get to know us to get to know him or her or them or however you view God. But then creates us in such a way that God is beyond our understanding or ability to perceive. That makes no fucking sense. I mean, especially when people like pull out the line, well, God is just, he isn't really a being that you can like know and interact with. He's just being itself. Well, how the fuck am I supposed to have a relationship with being itself? So, like I said, I was just getting so frustrated with the lack of any kind of real answers, but then also being told that I was wrong for expecting answers. And even things like I would say, well, the Bible says all things work together for good, that those who love God and according to his purpose, or whatever that verse says. I'm like, okay, but if you look at like the history of like people who are faithful to God, like, or even, I mean, and I'm not even looking at just people who like call themselves Christian and are like, devoutly and diligently following him, but like I would go to verses like in First John where it says everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. So I'm looking, okay, everyone who's just a loving person, they get it. And if you could say anything is according to God's purpose, it's loving people. So you look at all these people who are loving people, who are good people, and shit just is not working out for them. What the fuck is going on with that? And the answer I got was, well, maybe you just need to redefine what working out for good is. So it's like, sorry, it gets me a little worked up. I'm not really sure. Uh, so the phrase I keep bringing up a lot when it comes to whether it's like apologetics or different arguments for whether it's, fundamentalist Christian to progressive Christian, spiritual, or whatever, is with any explanation I get, the phrase that keeps just coming into my mind is just ad hoc, meaning I'm giving you this explanation, not because I have any reason to believe this explanation is actually true, but it's an answer. I'll just and I don't and I'll say like this, they're just making it up, but I'm not saying they're doing it necessarily like with like malicious intent, like they're trying to be deceitful or lying or anything. But in their mind, because I know being a person who like this is where my mind was at, so I'm speaking from my own experience again, not to project on anyone else, but it was just come up with an answer, and if it explains it, then it works. Whether or not you have any reason to believe that it's actually real, if it answers it, then it works. Because that was the thing I would find like with any form of Christianity, from fundamentalist to progressive and anything in between. It's like there was an answer for everything, but not in a good way. It was like, so again, going back to my experience, when people would look at my healing, they say, well, clearly God loves you so much. I mean, look what he did for you. But then when I would bring up the whole thing about, okay, well, what about everyone else who died of this? I mean, even just in my own life, I have an aunt and uncle who died of cancer. I have a friend from high school who died from cancer when he was 30. In my elementary school, there was a little girl, I don't remember, kindergarten, third grade, somewhere around there, who died of leukemia. What's clear about God in those situations? And then, but of course, then you get to like, oh well, God's mysterious, he's beyond us, we can't understand. Okay, well, a second ago you told me he was clear. Now he's mysterious. Which is it? And they sound so sure of themselves. But when I ask for any kind of assurance in a way that I can actually know that what they're saying about God is true, I'm told, well, you can't expect that. One of the answers I've gotten that frustrates me the most when it comes to questions like this are like, why isn't God more obvious? Like people will say, well, if he would just made himself clear to us, then it wouldn't require faith. Then we got to have faith. Like, why? Why do we need faith? And why would God just, and apparently if God just revealing himself to us somehow deprives us of the opportunity of having faith, well, then what was Jesus? Apparently God literally showing up in the flesh. Like, so how can you tell me that God can't just show up when you're telling me that God showed up as Jesus? Yeah, I hear you, Brittany. I laugh because you want to ask, do you hear the toxicity coming out of your mouth? Like, yeah. That's the thing. Like, I kept finding myself asking Christians, like, do you hear yourself? So this is why. So speaking of like asking for proof, I mean, just look in the Bible and how many times God literally showed up for people and gave them proof. And when they asked for proof, didn't chastise them for it, but gave it to them. I mean, I can't help, being a Tommy myself, and as you'll see in the title of the show, Doubting Tommy, I cannot help but think of my man, my namesake disciple, Doubting Thomas. When the other disciples told him, "Oh, Jesus is back from the dead," and he said, "Well, I'm not going to believe it until I see him for myself and, touch the holes in his hands and his side." And, like, and then how did Jesus respond to that? Did he say, "How dare you ask for proof? That's not how I work"? Again, not that saying that I believe all the story, but to the Christians who do and are telling me that this isn't how it works, your story says that this is how it works. As I like to say, Jesus showed up and allowed Thomas to finger his holes. That's all I'm asking for. It's just a chance to finger Jesus's holes. With that, I need a little more scotch. I don't know about the rest of y'all. But here's the thing. I wasn't just frustrated with the other Christians who were telling me not to expect any evidence. I was frustrated with the God who wasn't giving me any himself. Now, mind you, this is mostly like post-Christianity. At this point, I'm basically already like 1 foot out the door. I'm just looking for anything to keep me in. I wasn't calling myself an atheist at this point, but for those who would say like, well, people like all these atheists, they're just angry at God, who they apparently don't believe in anyway. It's like, that's not it. And you may have noticed, I definitely have a lot of anger now looking back on it, but the anger is not why I left. So don't get it twisted. This is all in the aftermath. But speaking of atheism, it basically got to the point where I wasn't even referring to myself as atheist, but in these conversations, people started referring to me as atheist. They're like, "Oh, you atheists are always like too skeptical," or "Oh, whatever." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So then at that point, I'm like, and I don't even necessarily remember like actively seeking out like any sort of like atheist thought or atheist thinkers or atheist voices or points of view or anything. I think it was just more like due to like the YouTube algorithm with a lot of the things I had been watching connected like deconstruction about how maybe like things like biblical stories aren't necessarily historically accurate based on here's the archaeology or whatever. I think one of the first just like straight up atheist videos I watched is by this channel called Holy Kool-Aid, which still highly recommend. Awesome dude. But then that led to like watching debates between like apologists and atheists, particularly like, people remember the whole like new atheists, the Four Horsemen, the late Christopher Hitchens and recently late Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris. So I remember growing up just thinking, oh, these people, they're atheists. They're obviously messed up and they're just wrong and hateful and evil or whatever. But then actually listening to them in these debates, like I said, I would just like listen to the debate, no real strong opinions. Like, oh, let's just see what they have to say. But then I found myself just almost like subconsciously like rooting for the atheist in the debate because I'm realizing these apologists, like all these like apologetics and arguments like for the faith that I grew up thinking were so solid, like long story short, really not. But yeah, so I mean, and this could be a whole series of episodes, just all the issues I have with apologetics, um, and how empty they really are. I mean, part of it is like what eventually, I don't know if this necessarily like was one of the things that caused me to lose my faith, or maybe really just more like solidified not having the faith anymore, was the whole notion that apologetics even exists in the first place. Just the fact that God is apparently so not apparent that we need people to explain to us that he really does exist. Like, in what other situation when it comes to like a personal relationship, like does that work that way? I always love going back to the illustration of God as a father. And like, I have kids. How do my kids know that I exist? Because I fucking show up. If my kids had to rely on someone else to tell them that I exist and to tell them that I love them and to tell them what I want for them, like what kind of shitty father would I be if that's what I had to rely on? And or if that's what they had to rely on to know me. But yet I'm told God is like such a good father and cares about me so much. But this is the method he does it. He leaves it up to like people like Frank Turek, who you've been watching enough. You've seen that guy. Like, really? If it's up to people like him, we're fucked. I'm sorry, but because even the more like intellectual types, like your William Lane Craigs, like they'll pull out like all these like philosophical arguments. Like, well, if you think about this like critically in this way, like it just logically makes sense that there is a God. Like, okay, if I have to go to those lengths, basically, like in order to know God exists, like how smart do I have to be? Shouldn't I be able to, just as me, just as a normal person, especially if you're calling this God, a loving, personal, creator of reality itself, like shouldn't reality and just what I observe be enough? Which brings me to the argument, and this is probably of all the like, because like looking back on my timeline of like when I actually became atheist versus just non-believer or whatever, it's hard to really pinpoint exactly how the transition happened or what exactly was the thing. Probably the closest I'm trying to look for it in my notes. Where did I have this? Oh yeah. So the closest thing to any sort of specific moment I could point to, ironically, was during a prayer exercise for the small group I was in at the time. So this was in October of 2021. So like month and a half after being in remission. Again, still at this point, just still in very much like just kind of searching, trying to like grasp at whatever I could hold on to figure anything out, kind of thing. And so in the small group, one of our like assignments for the week before our next meeting was we were all told, okay, just spend an hour alone with God at some point during the week, and we'll come back next week and talk about it. So at this point, I'm just like, all right. Because also, like, the dudes in my small group, to their credit, like they knew, like at this point, like what I was going through. They allowed me to be very open with them about, my deconstruction, how I wasn't really. And I told them I don't really consider myself a Christian anymore, but I don't really know what I think. And they were all like super supportive, didn't like kick me out, at least then. Long story. I wasn't actually kicked out. Like I said, long story. We may or may not get to that part later, because I was also in this group with Matt. But anyway, back to the positives. They were at this point super supportive. So it was great that I felt being like completely honest with them, because this was my experience during that hour I spent with God. I didn't necessarily consciously go into it with this attitude, but essentially that was me giving God his last chance. to like actually show up and prove to me that he was really there. But the whole time, as I kept thinking about like everything that I was thinking about, like, because I remember I was sitting in my garage, like with it open, like just kind of looking out into the yard. And I remember it was raining at the time. And so just kind of looking at, like, paying attention to the rain, like the trees, grass, whatever, birds or whatever was happening. And just like everything where before I said, oh, this is God, like causing the rain. This is God, like moving the clouds. This is God with behind the wind and whatever. Like trying to think about it more. Yeah, just think about it more, I guess. And just like evaluating everything and just like, where is God in this? Is this God, or is this just how things naturally happen? Is this God, or is this just how, or am I just been trained to see God in this? So I basically at the beginning of the hour just told God, okay, show up. But throughout the whole hour, like if anything, God just kept receding and receding. It's like, I didn't hear shit. But the more I thought about things, like, I think this is just the way things just happen. Like, I don't really see how they need a God behind any of this. And again, this is extremely long story short version of this. I just enjoy the irony of me essentially becoming an atheist through a prayer exercise. But yeah, so basically October 2021 is essentially when I consider myself, okay, that's kind of when I became atheist. And what it really came down to was just, and again, I'm going to say this, and again, I don't want this to be heard at like as applying to anyone else in the other way. Like, so basically what I say is like, I became atheist because I just started being honest with myself. And that's not to say that those who aren't atheists aren't being honest with themselves. That's not at all. Again, just hear this as me saying where I'm coming from. But once I became honest with myself, I realized, I mean, essentially in a lot of these things, like I'm only believing that these things mean there is a God because I was told to interpret these things that way. I don't actually see God anywhere. I just see things that I'm told are God. So that's why, like, when people talk about, arguments against God or against God's existence or the reasons they're an atheist, like the more popular or the more sexy argument you might say is the argument. What was it? The argument from evil. Basically, like, why does evil exist? And that's a strong argument, and I believe the strength of the argument of that actually comes from, like, I mean, I can basically express the argument from evil in 6 words, all from the Bible. In 1 John, it says, God is love. And in 1 Corinthians, the famous love passage, it says, love always protects. So if God is love and love always protects, just look at the world and tell me that everyone looks protected. So one of those statements, or both, is not true. I don't see any way around that. If anyone has an answer, like I said, I want interaction on this. I don't want this to come across as me saying I can't be talked out of this. Like, look, if someone has something to say to me that like proves to me that like God exists and loves me, like I would absolutely love to hear that. So if you got something like, so at any point and with anything I'm saying, if you got a rebuttal for it, please let me know. I mean that sincerely. So for me, the problem of evil, that's what it's called, the problem of evil. um, to me, that wasn't the biggest thing. To me, the biggest issue was what's known as the argument of divine hiddenness. And we've talked about this on the show before, but essentially, and there's like an official version of the argument, which is like if God existed and really loved us and wanted to get to know us, there would be no what they call non-resistant non-believers, because if someone wanted to know God, then they would know God, because that would just make sense based on what we're told about God. And again, a lot of this is kind of based on like the Christian God more specifically. But honestly, with that argument, to me, the whole like non-resistant part is completely unnecessary, because then you're saying basically someone like can resist enough to overcome how much God is wanting them to know him, which makes no sense if you're also telling me that God is all powerful. And then also, I mean, just the story of Paul from the Bible completely destroys that. Can you think of anyone more resistant to knowing Jesus than Paul, who was actively persecuting Christians, but then Jesus chose to show up to him anyway? So if you're telling me that like God can't overcome my resistance to belief in him, like weird flex, but okay. um, yeah. So, because this was something that like even as a Christian, I remember like talking to friends about that kind of bothered me. I always say it was like, well, why isn't God more obvious? Like, why does it? He just like show up and they would say, the usual things like, oh, well, look at the trees. Like, of course he's obvious. Look at creation and everything that shows like the design and whatever. And the design, don't get me started on design. Anyway, but I said, no, I mean like, just like obvious. Just again, going back to the Bible, like he did with Jesus. He just showed up and said, hey, I'm God, which, you could argue whether, depending on which gospel you're reading, whether Jesus actually said he's God. That's whole other issue. But like especially now, like coming off of like what I had gone through and even like leading up to cancer, like I said, like losing my job and having to move and like the pandemic and just how uncertain and in upheaval like my entire life was at that point, and then coming off of all of that and being like, I thought I was dying and now I'm not, and now I have this cliche and say a new lease on life, like I get to start over. It's like I just want something that I can be sure of and to hold on to. But all I'm hearing from other believers is I can't expect that. And that sucks. Let me tell you. Exactly what Brittany says here is like, all of a sudden change. I needed something concrete, which, well, like I said, not only was I not given that, but essentially in so many words told I was wrong to expect it. When again, your Bible tells me, whether it's Jesus or showing up for Paul or like the tests of Gideon or like all the prophets that he spoke directly to, and you're telling me that's too much? So like that was just a little much for me to take. So again, just consulting my notes, like where was I? Oh yeah. So again, there's like one of the common tropes, and because I hear this all the time from like Christians and apologists when talking about like atheists or people who like leave the faith, will try to assign motives to it because they're like, well, because from their point of view, and again, speaking from someone who's been there, I know this point of view where it's like, well, God is so clearly obvious, and and our Bible says basically, everyone knows that God exists, but those who say they don't, they're just, suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. And okay, so this is one of the things I'm wanting to share with people that when I talk about things I haven't talked about much in public before, it's like, man, my mind is not wanting to focus right now. So my apologies. Trying to rein it in here. Um, okay, so with that whole trope of people leaving the faith because they're angry. First of all, or because they got hurt by the church, or they feel like God let them down, or whatever. So first of all, I just went that is not why I left the faith. Like, hopefully, like, one of the things I've been able to get across, like, me, like, losing my faith, it was very much more on the, like, intellectual side, like me just thinking through things. I'm not trying to, like, paint myself as some, like, grand intellectual and, like, super smart or whatever. I'm just saying, but that was, for me, it was just the, like, logical conclusion of, like, where all my thoughts were going. It was like, okay, I see no reason to believe anymore. Now then, after that, I started getting the feels, as it were. So no, I mean, I'm not angry at God because I don't believe that God exists. Now, if I did find out that God did exist, then I'd be fucking pissed. Guarantee it. Because people, like, that's one of the things that people will ask atheists, like, well, if you find out that God really did exist, like, what would you say? I know exactly what I would say to God if I found out that he was real. She, they, whatever. So let's just say it's like when I die and there I am standing before him. I will tell you exactly my reaction. I will look him dead in the eye, probably with tears in mine, and just say, "Where were you?" Because all my life, I was told you were there, and you were there for me. And that you loved me, and that you wanted a relationship with me, and you wanted me to know you were there. But you gave me nothing concrete to show that. All I got was all these vague theologies and teachings and things told to me by other people that I was supposed to interpret as you. And if that wasn't enough for me, then that was my fault. That if not hearing anything from you caused me to not believe anymore, that was my fault. So where were you? You really cared about me that much. And this goes back to me talking about like from the very beginning. Growing up in that church that told me like, what's a relationship? It's a relationship. Because like when people talk about things like religious trauma and like teachings that do harm, like the things that come to mind a lot is obviously like teaching about hell. Well, yeah, that obviously that'll do some shit to you and like fuck me up a bit, like I said. And I think according to studies, apparently one of the things that actually causes the most trauma is the whole like doctrine of the rapture, like with people like being afraid of not being taken up at the right time and being left behind, like that fucking book series. But for me, it was really a lot of the teachings that to most people sound like the nice and like friendly. So, because honestly, looking back, if I were to like pinpoint a specific teaching that maybe did the most damage, it was probably that the whole it's a relationship, not a religion. Because again, like I said, I was told to have a relationship, a close relationship, like a father and son, like a lover, with this entity that I couldn't even see, that I didn't even know was there, that I was getting nothing from unless I was reading a book or attending service at a church or hearing from other people about this person, entity, whatever, that apparently wanted so desperately to have this relationship with me. I almost wish it was a religion instead of a relationship, because with a religion, you have clear rules, clear standards. You know exactly where you stand. It's like, am I following the rules or am I not? But relationships are more complicated, especially when they're one-sided. So I want to share this video. So one you may have seen when I lost connection a little bit ago. There's this YouTube channel. It's called Pine Creek. This guy, he's an atheist. He does like live streams a lot. And so this is just a clip from one of his episodes. And this is one of those videos like I would share more and like talk about it more, except I fucking hate the title because I hate how inflammatory it is. Like the title is something like mocking theists about divine hiddenness or whatever, and it's like, But here's the thing, like, so he's going through this whole routine where from his angle he's like talking like mockingly like towards theists about how we're supposed to think about why we don't hear from God and why he isn't so obvious to us, but. So for like from how he's presenting it, it's this total like sarcastic kind of attitude. But for me, I remember the first time I watched it, and for multiple times when I would like rewatch it later, like it just brought tears to my eyes because this condescending tone he's using, like to talk to believers, it's like, this is what I was hearing. This is what was fucking me up. So here, I'll just play it and then we'll talk.
But how many Christians respond intellectually?
A video from Capturing Christian
A good
Community.
parent wants to develop their relationship with their children as much as they can. They wouldn't let their children think that they were gone, leave them in the dark about what they wanted, or refuse to comfort them in their pain, at least not if they can help it.
Talking about
Shouldn't they expect the same from God?
This is probably the most important part of this video. As a good parent, you would never purposely stay hidden from your child or leave your child questioning who you really are and that you really love them and that you hugs and playing and teaching and all these things. You would never go through other people to do that, would you? Although nowadays people hire nannies to do their work.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we expect the same from God? The answer has to be a resounding yes from every Christian and every Jew and every Muslim. Maybe your dad's not present for you because it's a mystery. Your dad's not present for you for mysterious reasons, okay? Okay, is that okay with you? Maybe you're just rebellious too, you know that, right? You rebellious, bad person who doubts the Father who never appears to you. It's mysterious, okay? Just keep believing, all right? You can do it. There's too much at stake, right? We're talking about heaven and hell here, okay? It's almost like you got to speak to them this way, like children.
That's still hard to watch. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, that's what I was told. You just got to keep believing. Even though you don't see anything, hey, just keep believing, right? 'Cause if you don't, then that means there's something wrong with you, right? Yeah. So eventually I just said, fuck that. I mean, it was just like I said, this was all like after I was already an atheist, and then now like looking back on things like this is what made stuff like what he's saying here hurt so much. It's like no, I can't imagine what this is like. Because like I said, I'm fortunate to have two very loving, awesome parents. But imagine, and I know like some of you watching may not have to imagine this, and maybe this is your life, but you're an orphan. But you're told you have your parents are out there and they love you and they want to have you back. They want a relationship with you. You just got to keep believing that they're there. Now you're not hearing from them directly, but look, they're sending us letters. And we're telling you what they're saying about you and how much they love you and how much they want to have you back, and eventually they'll show up. Just keep believing. You just got to keep believing that they're there. But you wouldn't doubt them because you're a good son. You wouldn't want them to think that you don't believe them, right? Because that would be bad. But they're there and they love you and they want to know you so much. And just hearing this over and over and over, year after year after year, and just making this what your life is about. And then after you realize they weren't there. You know, maybe they're dead, maybe gone, whatever. It's like, obviously, you're not mad at them because they're not there. But it still hurts. because this was your life. This is what your every thought had to be captive to. This is what your identity was. This is what you based every single thing about your life on. And now you realize there was nothing there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to transition that into the rest of the things I was wanting to talk about tonight. So I guess let's just let that just sit for a sec. I don't know. So now, where am I at? So I want to talk about a little bit about the reaction that I've been getting, like since being more public about losing my faith. I mean, there's some of the more obvious, like I said, especially coming off of being healed from cancer. Of course, I got the whole like, well, look at what God did for you. How can you not appreciate that? And it's like, okay, I get it, but I get it. I mean, and like the people say, well, just come back, like as if it was that easy. As if like faith and what you believe is just a switch you can flip on and off again. Because I know a lot of the people who want me to come back to faith are doing so, like I said, out of genuine love and concern because they really think, well, this is what's best for me. But I have to say, if you really think that coming back to faith is what's best for me, then one, you don't know my story. Or two, if you heard it, you weren't paying attention. Or three, you don't care. You just have to believe. And again, I get this coming from someone, who's been there. Like, it's just that whole mentality. I don't care what reality says. I know this is true, regardless of what anyone says. So if someone says a relationship with God isn't what they need, I know that's wrong because I know that that's what they need. So I get it. But to me, that just means you're not really listening. So if you think you're trying to help me by coming back, then you just don't understand. Because for me, at this point, to come back to faith would be to be so intellectually dishonest with myself. And that's just more, I just can't. Because this is another question like that me and like a lot of atheists get is like, so what would convince you that God exists and like convince you to come back? And I've thought about this a lot, and I kind of got to steal the answer from a fellow atheist, the name of Matt Dillahunty. If people are familiar with him, he's a very like public figure. He does a lot of debates and things like that. It's on YouTube, whatever. And he says, like, look, what would make me believe in God? Honestly, I don't know, because I mean, I could say things, but whether I'd say, oh, a certain kind of vision, but then you could explain that kind of vision away as a hallucination or whatever. So at the end of the day, what he says is like, look, if there is an all-knowing, all-powerful God who wants me to get to know him, whatever it takes for me to get to know him, he knows what that would take. So therefore, ball's in his court. So I actually, as an atheist, I do have people know like the Christian lingo, having a life verse. I actually do have a life verse as an atheist, which oddly enough, I don't remember the reference or even what book it's from, or whether it was like from the Gospels, or I think it was from Paul. I at least think I know that much. But the verse, it says, "Let God be true and every man a liar." Because at the end of the day, if God wants me back, like basically I'm done listening to what other people tell me about God. So I figure if God is real and wants me to know them and wants me to know something about them, that they exist, have a relationship with me, whatever, I want to hear it from them. Like I'm tired of hearing all the stuff from people, because at the end of the day, everything I'm hearing about God from people, again, going back to my whole line of questioning about how do you know? How do you know? How do you know? Anything that anyone has told me about God is completely indistinguishable from just thoughts from their own head. It's so, I guess, to maybe use an old saying from my more fundamentalist days, and this is something that like more fundamentalist Christians use as a kind of a pejorative against the more progressive types, saying like, well, you're basically making a God in your own image. It's like, well, yeah, I agree. And so that's all I was hearing from people when they were telling me about God. It's like, okay, how do I know this isn't just what you want God to be? Because something I also say is like, in a way, like being an atheist is kind of hard because, and we talked about this as an episode, like on an episode a while ago about, the God I don't believe in or whatever. It's like Christians, there's so many definitions of God. Like seriously, like if you ask like 100 Christians to define God or define Christianity for that matter, you'll get like 300 different answers. So it's almost like I'm almost at the point. It's like, look, okay, before I even make any kind of clear decision on whether God exists, like y'all figure out what God even means, and then I'll tell you what I think of that. But in the meantime, like all the things you keep telling me, because that's another popular saying among like people who are trying to do evangelism. It's like, oh, well, tell me about the God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in that God either. Like, look, like tell me about whatever God you do believe in. It's like, yeah, I don't believe in that one either. Kind of turning around on them. But yeah, just for anyone who's planning on using that as a line of evangelism, like that doesn't work. Please stop. But yeah. So for those who are faithful and like, oh, I gotta show this real quick from Kif. Like, it can't rain all the time. I believe that's from The Crow, if I'm correct. But yeah, gotta run. Appreciate you, Kif. Yeah, I may be wrapping up soon. We'll see, because I do need to pee. So, but thanks for hanging out. Everyone who's hanging out, really appreciate you. I've been seeing like we still actually have people watching, which definitely appreciate. So from here, I would say for those who do still believe and really want me to come back, I just say, if you have faith in God and if you trust God, trust Him with me. If He wants me back, He'll do something to bring me back. Now, as I also like to say, don't hold your breath. I stopped holding mine a while ago. Oh man, I'm just looking back through my notes. Like, I know we're coming up on almost 3 hours here, but so many things I still want to talk about. So I'll try to wrap up by just way of saying, okay, so where am I now? So I use the term atheist, which means so many different things to so many people. I've also come across another term. So people have like seen my shirt. I just want to point that out. Another phrase I like, apistivist. Basically, that just means without faith. Like, so pistis being like the Greek word for faith. So pistivus, meaning I just basically, I don't want to use faith as a foundation for how I view reality. Like, I prefer to know things. So yeah. And thank you, David, for hanging out with me. Appreciate you. Yeah, now this is something I also haven't talked about much, and maybe we'll get into more. Oh, you're out of loaded popcorn. Oh, sorry, man. I outlasted the popcorn. Damn it. So, but the concept of, does atheism just mean I just lack a belief in God, or is it actually saying I believe, or I'm saying there are no gods? Now, recently, I've actually think I've crossed over into the what's called the more strong atheism, to where I actually feel pretty confident saying there are no gods. And that's really just getting back to where did the concepts of gods even come from in the first place? And for me, again, very long story short, again, maybe we'll get into this in future episodes. The way I see it is gods were invented to explain the world like thousands of years ago. But the way we saw the world back then is not the way the world actually is. So for me, it's like gods were invented to explain a world that doesn't even exist. So what do you do when you're trying to explain something, but the explanation you came up with explains something that like you realize now is no longer the case? Like, usually you drop that as an explanation. So, like, I mean, the way I look at it is like, I'm as confident saying that God of any, whether it's the Christian God, Muslim God, all the Hindu pantheon of gods, I'm as comfortable saying that they don't exist as I am with saying that, like, leprechauns or banshees or unicorns or the tooth fairy doesn't exist. Sorry for anyone who heard that. I'm getting a little gassy. So yeah, that's just where I'm at. So another thing that people ask me is like, okay, why do I do this? As in like this show, or how vocal I am about my lack of faith. And honestly, a big part of it is just other people who I know maybe think like I do. Because I know for me, coming out of it, hearing other voices from other people expressing these types of beliefs is what really helped me. So I think, and I've received the positive feedback from people saying like, the things you're saying are helping me. And I've actually heard this from like non-Christians and Christians, like the Christians saying like, you know, like Keith we had on last week saying like, I mean, he doesn't necessarily consider himself Christian anymore, but apparently the things I'm saying, like helping them to like evaluate what they think. I'm like, okay, cool. If people are liking it, I'll keep going with it. But yeah, also just like I said, I just like to feel like I'm understood, which I think, you know, everyone can relate to that. So, all right, well, I'm going to go and just wrap up. Like I said, appreciate the hell out of everyone who's still with me, or anyone who's watching later. Still, keep the comments coming. I'll respond to them as I can. So, final thoughts. So, things like I've come away with from the whole thinking I'm dying, now I'm not, now like losing my faith, reevaluating everything. What do I really think is important? First of all, find yourself. Like really, like yourself. And figure out, what do you want out of your life? And not, because I used to think like measures of success that I had for myself, like I realized they were all based on what I thought I was supposed to do. But now I'm like, I mean, fuck all that. I mean, maybe some of that still applies to me. Maybe it still applies to you, whatever. But I mean, it's such a cliche, but just like be yourself. Like, I mean, I don't know of a better way to put that, because if you're not yourself, then like, who the hell are you at the end of the day? And then also, like related to that, find the people in your life who allow you to be yourself around them. Because I know what it's like to be around people who I know, okay, these are people I consider myself really close with, but it also feels like when I'm around them, I can't really be myself. And that kills you on the inside, quite honestly. Yeah. So not only find yourself, but find the people who let you be yourself, and then that's key. But then another thing I would say to the people who feel like, because I feel like my heart is for the people who, because I'm not necessarily trying, like I said, I'm not trying to talk anyone out of their faith. I feel like my words are more for, looks like you lost me again. And so I apologize. Let me know how much of that you missed. Um, yeah. So my heart is for the people who feel like they still have to believe for some reason, but but they feel like they don't, but they feel like they have to. Like, look, for the people who say, all right, bye, David. Thanks for hanging out, buddy. Appreciate you. Because one thing I hear from a lot of people is like, I just feel like I can't go through life without God, without my faith. Well, here's the thing. If there is no God, you have been doing it without him. You already have, and you already are. So if you want to believe in something, believe in yourself. And believe, like I said, believe in the people who are around you, who are supporting you. That's what it's all about. And the last thing I want to leave you with is, so for those who are familiar with, like, Pascal's wager, it's like, well, you might as well believe in God because, like, hey, who knows? It's like, you're basically betting on eternity. Like, if you're wrong, who cares? But if you're right, hey, you get it. But the way I look at it, like, again, long story short, we can go into more of this later. I see no reason, honestly, to believe that there is anything after this life. Like, nothing concrete to say, okay, there definitely is, that's what I'm going to be banking on. So for me, really, all that I can really be sure of is this life right now. So apparently a phrase that I've become known for, which, I wish I was actually the one who came up with it. But as an atheist, I believe in life before death. So since this is the only life I can be guaranteed of, this is the one I'm going to hang on to. And this is the one I'm going to make count. And if there is something after this, and if there is a God on the other side of this who expected me to live differently based on the lack of evidence that they left me, then that's their problem, not mine. So yeah. I mean, this is your life. This is your life. Live it. And whatever that means to you, whether that means like achievement or rest or anything in between, whatever that means for you. It's like, all right, glad someone else agrees. Thank you, Brittany. And thanks for sticking it out. So yeah, I mean, I still feel I could go on and on, but it's getting late. Like I said, I really need to pee. So I guess that'll be our cutoff there. So, but don't worry. Like, for those of you who are missing Matt, don't worry. He'll be back next week. And hey, maybe he'll be able to do one of these episodes too. Like, I'll be on vacation myself in a few weeks, but I haven't talked to him about that or not. I don't know if that's something he's wanting to do. So no pressure, Matt, if you're watching this later. But yeah. Let's see what David says here. I don't want to be so heavenly minded that I'm no earth good. Love one another. There you go. Yeah, I mean, and also, like I like to say, like, if there is an afterlife, a heaven or whatever, like, I'm still definitely open to being pleasantly surprised. So I'm not completely shutting myself off to the idea. I'm just going with what I got to go with right now. So, all right. So again, this was really cool for me to be able to do. So thank you everyone for sticking it out with this. And again, for those watching later, please leave your comments and thoughts. Love to hear what you think. If you have any questions for me, like anything I didn't get to, if you feel like you still want to know more about, please reach out, whether it's comments on here, direct messages through our The Humanity page, or my personal Facebook page. You can just find me, Tommy Stewart. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, Matt will be back again next week with me, and I don't know exactly what we'll be talking about, but it'll be something fun. So with that, as I believe our usual benediction is, may your things and stuff be forever with your people. And for me, take care. We'll see you.